So anyway, hope you enjoyed the Innovation Labs. We have Adam Silverman, Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. Today we have talked a lot about new technology trends and business practices, and definitely learned from a great assortment of best-in-class retailers and other industry experts. So Adam's going to join us to talk, about how to take these insights, apply them to your business, and other trends in the industry. So without further ado, Adam Silverman.
Great, thanks, Debbie. I appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Okay, let's see if the slides work. As we wait for that, I'll just do a quick intro. So my name is Adam Silverman, Principal Analyst at Forrester. I cover commerce technology, which includes what I call classic e-commerce tech, but also how that technology is entering the physical store, right, which I and Forrester calls the digital store. So things like even MPOS or analytics, and including the role of the associate too. And at Forrester, we also wrap that sort of insight with our primary research, which is increasingly looking at that omni-channel or cross-channel customer experience. And then we're even going deeper in terms of how customers want to interact with people, let's say associates in the store, and what they expect from technology in the physical space as well. So one of my favorite quotes is this. This is from, gosh, it's now dated. I need somebody else to come up with a new quote. So if you have a new quote that I can use, let me know. But the pace of change is accelerating faster than anticipated a year ago. That's what Blake Nordstrom said more than a year ago. And I would argue that that's happening today as well. We all feel that. We all know that it's accelerating quickly. And it reminds me when I first started in retail. So I've only worked at Forrester for about a couple of years now. But prior to Forrester, I worked in retail running e-commerce and digital marketing for companies like Target and Wet Seal and Guitar Center. And when I think about this, I think about when I first started e-commerce. It was a green field. We were asked to sort of build this e-commerce platform. And for the most part, we were left in the darkest corner of the office and asked to, sort of squirrel away and make this new technology. And certainly there were a lot of integrations and there was some challenges doing that. But for the most part, we were left alone. And what's different about it today than 15 years ago was that customer expectation piece. And you've heard a lot about that today. So I'm not going to go a ton into that. We'll have a first section that talks about that looks at Forrester data on customer behavior, but then we'll talk about the technology and how that's emerging and changing. But it's really the customer piece that's different. I don't know, about 8 years ago, I worked at a company called Baby Style, selling baby and maternity clothes, and it was an online pure play. And back then, we were one of the first retailers to build physical stores based on the data that came from our e-commerce business, right? So we were maybe the first Warby Parkers or the Bonobos, if you will. So, I think that a lot of the discussion today, right? We were talking about that earlier. A lot of the discussion today has been around these new business models, and I sometimes forget myself after think about in the past. I mean, I think a lot of these capabilities and these business models were out there, but it was the customer piece that's very different today, right? And so the way that I express it is just with this data chart here. So you see on the left, this is the percent of customers that use this device, which is a tablet, in those locations. So the top bit is sort of at home. The bottom right is sort of out and about while you're traveling. And then on the left is at another location, if you will. And so for the most part, tablets are desktop replacements. They're primarily used at home. But if you look at the smartphone, obviously the circles get much bigger, right? We're using smartphones in more locations. In fact, here it says stores, 66% of customers are using their smartphones in stores. So, this is just the way in which I sort of express how customer expectations are changing. Their smartphones are with them. We get this piece for sure. What's really interesting, I read this a couple of weeks ago, is that the Target actually says that 98% of their guests shop digitally or influence digitally in some way. So if we're talking about the role of digital, it's not necessarily about driving that individual transaction. We know that e-commerce is roughly 9% or 10% of overall sales, but it's the overall influence of digital that's very important, right? And so this popped out at me when I read this, and I think this just sort of shows where we're going. And for most of us, maybe we're leaders in the industry that we're probably here already as individual shoppers. So here's the agenda. We'll do a little bit on the customer in terms of looking at some data. Then we'll look at how digital technology creates opportunities in retail, in particular in the retail store. And then we'll look at some recommendations. So where the transaction occurs is irrelevant, right? We talk about silos and how we're measuring e-commerce separately. Well, the customers don't care, right? We know this. Customers do not care about channels. It's something that we have as a legacy left over in terms of our businesses. And so in order to transform, we need to sort of move beyond this channel thinking. So customers don't care. And in fact, 52% of store sales are influenced with online. So we showed Target was more of a digital influence, right? And this is now just talking about transactions and looking at how store sales are influenced. And it's not just in terms of the influence of that sale, but it's also how the devices they're using. So 28% of online sales are now from mobile and tablet, so that's growing quite rapidly. If you look at the holiday seasons, in particular, sales go from, can range from 40 to 50%. Even traffic can be 60 to 70% of overall traffic for that e-commerce business. So the role of mobile is obviously very significant. And I put this up here. This is a pattern of Lilly Pulitzer. We all know what happened with Target and their site crashing when they deployed their new product line. What was interesting to me was in that same article that I grabbed, the 98%. Now, what was interesting to me was that the cause of this that they stated was due to their mobile site getting too much traffic and too many transactions, right? So that was interesting because that was one of the first examples where, if you sort of representing, if you neglect mobile in any significant way, you can actually do significant damage to your business. So no longer is it a nice to have, right? It is a must have. And this is a great example that you can take back to your teams to say, look, this is what happened with Lilly, so we need to make sure that this doesn't happen with our organization and make sure that you're thinking ahead about how mobile is driving influence in your organization and how it's impacting overall sales and performance at your company. So customers have high expectations when it comes to channel integration as well. It's not just about where they purchase and how they purchase, it's what they expect from the organization that they work with. So we heard earlier about click and collect. So 73% of customers expect to click and collect, which is either buy or reserve online and pick up in the store. 86% expect to return online orders in the store. I'm definitely one of them. I know this is much harder, much easier said than done, but certainly our customers are expecting this. And 89% of customers expect to view the in-store inventory of products online. And again, I think you've seen some of this data from others earlier today, that this is fairly significant. Okay, so you've seen all the data, and you go, okay, that's great. Well, I'm not really going to do this now. It's not that important. What's changing is the risk, right? So if you don't do this, this is what happens. In our technographics data, we show that a quarter of customers won't even go into your store if they cannot view the online inventory, the in-store inventory online. So you might have all the widgets in the world at your store, but if you're not surfacing them online for customers to have that confidence that they need in order to go to the store, they're not even going to go to your store. Right? So this is an example of how the risks are actually growing and how some of these omni-channel initiatives are absolutely critical to customers. Okay, so now let's move into the store. Okay, so this question asks, in the past 3 months, have you used your cell phone for any of the following while shopping in a physical store? And so I grouped this first box first before I roll out the rest of the data. And you can see here to compare prices, to research a product. So how customers are using their devices in store are for sort of basic needs that they have in terms of where is this thing? How much does it cost? Where can I get it? Right? It's not about always the experiential stuff. It's about sort of that blocking and tackling. Right? I just want to get this. Help me get this item. And then down below, the other answers that customers state, and you can see here things like more of the social aspect, to take a picture of a product to share with friends or to access Wi-Fi. Also on the bottom, you see elements around more of a product research to sort of read customer reviews and to check availability. I would argue that you can also put those into the product research section as well. Those I think are also important too. But I think you get the notion here that the in-store experience, as much as we like in the press to talk about all these whiz-bang and great experiences, It's really about the basics, right? The basics are very important, and these are becoming mandatory for retailers today. Okay, so you've checked prices in aisle. We say, or we show through our research, that 23% of customers are doing price comparison in aisle on their smartphone. Now, this is a short window, so it's 3 months. If you expand this out to 6 months or longer, that number goes way up. So you've heard probably this stat in different formats already, but this is the short window, 3 months. 23% of customers have said they check prices in aisle. So then what do they do after that? 49% continue to buy in that store, right? So the majority of customers are still purchasing those products in the store, but a whopping 41% will actually leave your store and buy elsewhere, either at another physical store or online. And so this is a bit of a nod to showrooming. I would argue that this might have actually been occurring in the past. We just now have the ability to measure this in a more concrete way. And in fact, there are other studies that show that customers that use their smartphones in aisle to do things like check pricing are even more likely to transact in your store. So I think this sort of showcases the fear of showrooming, but also that it's a bit of a myth, right? That customers are actively using their smartphones in aisle, and those that do are more qualified and more likely to purchase at your retail store. So looking at the associate, this is a growing area of research for Forrester in terms of how the customers want to interact with associates. So digitally enabled associates add value. The question here is, imagine that you are shopping in a store where there's a sales associate with a mobile device. What would you expect them to do for you? Again, there's 3 groups here. So the first one is looking at product information. 69% of customers expect associates to have access to that product information. They also expect them to check additional inventory, as well as look up inventory at another location. So it's really about where is that product, right? Again, the blocking and tackling. Customers also expect to have the associate provide basic product information or be able to reserve those items at another store. Only 35% actually want the associate to do checkout, right? As we think about self-service and this notion of retailers wanting to go to more of a self-service model and use technology to have the customer self-service for most of the aspects of shopping, and then maybe go to an associate to check out, there's only a third of customers that actually want an associate to do that, right? And then finally, sort of at the bottom of the bucket here is looking up social recommendations and product reviews, looking at past purchases to make product recommendations. That's only 17%, right? So in the industry, we talk a lot about access to CRM information and understanding the customer to make product recommendations. But the reality is that customers are a little bit I wouldn't say fearful, but they're a little bit wary to actually engage with associates now in that capacity. Some of it's around privacy. Some of it could be just around that the associate's not adding incremental value to that conversation. And for those that are greeting customers by name as they enter the store, only 11% of customers actually want that from their associates, right? In the world of beacons, let's say, where you have just a limited number of notifications to communicate with customers, sometimes we use the first notification to just say hello, right? And we, as retailers, feel that that's customer-centric, but in fact, customers are not as excited about that. Now, it really depends on the category that you're in, but overall, you can see here, again, the story is around those blocking and tackling components of where is this product, how do I find it, less about that really experiential engagements in terms of, let's say, mentioning me by name as I walk into the store. And then thinking about that by category, as I mentioned, it really depends on the category that you're in terms of how customers will engage with you. The question here says, I'm interested in using a store employee equipped with mobile devices. So the overall US average here is 39%. So 39% of customers very interested in and more likely in working with associates with digital devices. As you look at the different categories here, maybe no surprises, those categories at the top, such as luxury or large appliances, those categories that require more of a consideration in terms of that purchase, that obviously indexes quite a bit. So 54% of luxury goods shoppers are actually looking for associates or more interested in working with associates with digital devices. And you can see here large appliances, jewelry, and so no surprises here, but I would say the takeaway is if you work in a product category that requires more of a considered purchase, really start to think about how your associates are engaging with customers with digital devices, because it could be that a good portion of your customers would engage with those associates with digital devices if you had them for them to use. And this is a bit of this is what basically our life cycle. You can see here in the middle there's the customer life cycle, and on those callouts are what we're referring to as touch points here. And you can just see the number of touch points in which customers are engaging is actually quite large as they go through the life cycle. And so what that does is, especially in the physical store, as you're using more devices, is that data is actually the amount of data that's being generated is actually rising quite a bit. Right, so the in-store data capture is skyrocketing. One of the vendors that I work with mentioned that they're able to capture 10,000 data points within a single shopping session in the store. Right, so that's, let's say, where you stand, where you travel in the store, but it also includes who you're with. Right, are you with an associate? Where are you with that associate? How are you traveling the store with them, and for how long? Right, so we have all of this data now that's being generated in the retail store, and there's solutions out there that help you capture that data. But notice I'm using the word data and not necessarily the word insight, because although there's a lot of data, the majority of it is going wasted and not leveraged, not being used. And so only 12% of enterprise data is used for analytics. Right, so and this is a more broad set of customers. This is actually more broadly outside of retail, but we see the same behavior in retail as well, especially in the physical stores. We have this new technology to capture all of these data points, but yet not using it for creating insight. So our customers, though, are rooting for us, right? If we think about how they're, what kind of experiences they want in the store, they actually do want those personalized experiences. So 45% of consumers have chosen, recommended, or paid more for a brand that provides a personalized service or experience. Right? So we have the ability to collect this data. We have the ability to store it and access it. But our ability to turn it into insight and add value to customers is lacking, even though our customers are raising their hand. So there's a huge opportunity. We're at the very beginning stages of sort of this digital store transformation, and data will be at the heart of this transformation as we are able to turn that data into insight and help our customers have a more engaging experience. And so you've heard a lot about personalization. Personalization is coming to the physical store. You've even seen this image or a similar image of the Rebecca Minkoff store here in New York in Soho. And if you were on the tour yesterday, I believe you went to the store as well. And so they have these digital screens, as you can see here, shopping in the front. But they also have that screen in the dressing room as well, where you're able to interact and ask associates to bring you items, and that shopping session can be saved and brought home with you, and you can resume that shopping session at home as well. And so with all of that becomes more data collection, more turning that data into insight and be able to drive personalization in the retail store. So this is emerging. This is an emerging area within retail. Okay, so let's talk about, so that was the customer piece, and I know you had a good dose of that today. So let's talk about how digital is creating opportunities in the retail store. So the first thing I want to talk about first is this notion of digital customer experience, which I would call, again, those whiz-bang experiences in aisle, but also the operational excellence as well. Right? As I think the industry generally talks about the customer-facing piece, but the reality is, on the operational side, improving the business performance and the role of the associate and making their job easier and just making the store more efficient is a massive opportunity that I think is underrepresented in the press. but represents a massive opportunity for your organization. So I'll be talking about both of these concepts, this customer experience and operational excellence side as well. Okay, so a different format here. I'm going to roll out these 7 elements, and then I'll go through individual case studies on these. And you can see on the right side, I've organized it by the operational excellence and then customer experience. Okay, so digital is creating new opportunities by enabling new insights, optimizing profitability, empowering employees, so that's a big area of focus for many of us, improving service levels, influencing sales, bridging the physical with the digital, and then personalizing the shopping experience. So let's go through each one of these. Okay, so enabling new insights. This is an example of Crocs and some of their physical stores where they're leveraging analytics in the store to optimize the footprint and to create a greater conversion rate within their stores. There's probably a few other examples I can choose to use here as well. This is another emerging area, but in terms of leveraging analytics to improve the footfall and the overall planogram of the store, that seems to be sort of phase 1 of analytics in the retail store. And so they've had a lift of roughly 20% in terms of conversion rate in the store just by leveraging analytics to improve the layout of the store. And so those are great first steps for analytics and using insights to improve the store. And we'll see more of this, and actually we'll see it turn more towards real time, where it's not just a one-time, let's change the footprint of the store, but we're actually using analytics to drive insight on an ongoing basis. Optimizing profitability. Hointer is a pretty cool company. They're based in Seattle. They are a technology company that often expresses their value by opening up their own stores, and they've done that model for a few years now. And what they do is they basically optimize the back room, and so rather than have all the inventory in the front, in the main shopping area, they move it to the back and they use technology to improve that shopping experience. So you're using your phone to scan an item, and then you simply go to the dressing room and the items are waiting for you in your dressing room. So they recently did a deployment with Macy's in a test store, and they are able to offer 60% more choices basically in store than previously, right? So for those of us that work in e-commerce, more choices, more styles means generally more revenue, right? So they're able to make the store more efficient and drive that experience in the store by just sort of changing that model and leveraging technology in new ways. Empowering employees. So UGG Australia uses technology in the hands of associates to leverage the endless aisle. They have tested some smaller footprint stores in high traffic areas, let's say tourist areas, and they're able to drive roughly 30% of their revenue through endless aisle, right? So these are real numbers that might not all be incremental. Even if you took half of that, you'd say 15% is incremental. I still think that's a very big number for endless aisle. And the way they do it is by being very proactive with their customers. The associates are actively mentioning to the customer the purpose of the device and sort of the benefit that the customer will get, right? So they're making it about the customer and they're being proactive. They're not just setting it and forgetting it. So I think a lot of the associate tools in particular need a more of a proactive, upfront approach than simply just putting it in the hands of the associates and letting them work with customers without actually proactively mentioning the value to them. Improving service levels. This is actually an omni-channel fulfillment example. I chose to put it here because getting your package 2 full days quicker is, I think, an improvement in service. And so Best Buy is leveraging their stores to do store fulfillment. I think this is probably something that we all know in terms of the topic, but I just want to remind us that this is really important still. Perhaps that's one of the more important elements of retail over the past few years, but it will still remain at the top of the list because there's just a transformation that occurs when customers are able to get their packages quicker and stores are able to, or retailers are able to leverage their inventory in more productive ways. Influencing sales. So 82% of customers make purchase decisions in aisle. This is just a remarkable stat. It's not that they come to the store and have no idea what they want. They actually come with a specific purpose, but when they're in aisle, they're actively looking, or maybe I should say it differently, they're interested in receiving advice, or they're open to buying additional products, and the number is just quite massive, right? So imagine if we're able to turn this number and leverage this by using technology to actually drive conversion rate and awareness of certain products. And I think this is also where some of that predictive analytics comes to play as well. And there's probably a mashup here too with the associate, where you're empowering the associate to help drive conversion on this number, right? Because if we can just get that one extra item in that basket, we all know how transformative that'll be for our organization. So just a massive opportunity in terms of influencing sales within the store. Bridging the physical with the digital. So this is a beacon example, at least a beacon image. And most of the beacon examples today have been roughly, I would say mostly around giving offers in aisle, right? And I think that's an okay use case. But I think there's a deeper purpose. I'm a big fan of BLE, which is the Bluetooth Low Energy, which powers beacons. I know earlier in the panel, sort of beacons was in the bottom left in terms of impact. And I think in its current state, as we're trying out new ways in which to use this technology, I'd probably agree with that, right? But the technology is here to stay, and those retailers that are experimenting and leveraging the technology to create a more engaging experience will actually unlock and this technology and move it more up the value proposition. In fact, I think it's going to be more around service. So if you think about, let's say, unlocking VIP locations within your store, let's say a VIP dressing room, right, that might have water or just a better experience, or unlocking a display case. It was, Apple, I think, missed an opportunity to have customers unlock the watch display case with their own technology, or I should say one that they have championed. I should say it that way. That's probably a better way of saying it. So I think you understand my point in terms of it's not always about offers, it's about service as well. And then finally, personalizing the shopping experience. I mentioned Rebecca Minkoff. 75% of customers engage with their product recommendation engine within the store, and 30% of customers are using the technology in the dressing room to ask for additional items from the associate, right? So those are customers that would have probably never asked for those items, and in terms of getting dressed and going out and finding the item that fits right is actually kind of a barrier. So in the dressing room, they can simply ask for the right size, and 30% of them are doing that, and they're driving incremental demand with this technology. Okay, so there are some barriers, and these are the 4 top ones that I see in terms of the digital store merging, and I think this is probably a focus for all of us in our teams, and it's not just one team. I think it's collectively many teams that need to solve for these. Okay, the first is poor store connectivity prevents modern retail apps from being effective. So things like cloud-based POS as a great example. We were talking about or even beacons for that matter, right? They require connectivity to create these experiences, requires connectivity to sort of transform how store systems work. And unless you have full coverage that's, that has no faults whatsoever, that's completely reliable, it becomes a challenge. So connectivity is certainly one of the areas that we need to solve for, and that's why I think this becomes a much bigger challenge for many retailers, because without that robust connectivity, many of these examples that you hear about in the press might actually fall flat just because it cannot be scaled out to all the stores. And in fact, if you have a larger store, you might not have that same experience across that store as you're actually shopping. Number 2, in terms of barriers, are that retail store systems are focused on record keeping and not engagement. So it's what we call systems of record versus systems of engagement. Think of systems of record as your point of sale, collecting orders, understanding what inventory is in the store. It's just designed to track stuff, right? And that's great for where we were 10 years ago. But where we are today is that these retail systems need to move from record keeping to engagement. And in fact, if I think about MPOS as an example, mobile point of sale or service, just by putting the letter M in mobility means that the associate can actually do much more. It's not just about record keeping in that case. And that the tool, MPOS, or even if you think about it, just the category of point of sale becomes really about engagement, just because you're making it mobile. So I believe that is the way it's going. I mean, it just has to be, right? We're all mobilely enabled, and it's something that is core to our beings as consumers. Retailers will certainly be there as well, and all the store systems are going to turn into engagement facilitation systems rather than just keeping track of stuff. 3, so existing systems can provide real-time data insights across all channels, right? So this is an important one. Even if you think about, let's just give an example. Somebody earlier mentioned kind of a notion of skills-based routing, right? Where there's a customer that's maybe dwelling in a specific area of the store, and you want to send the right associate to help that customer. Well, you need real-time insight and analytics to drive that experience. So without this connectivity and without the ability to do real-time analytics and data insight, you're not really moving into the real-time world of retail, of physical retail, and that's basically where it's going. So this insight piece is very critical, and the key piece is that it will be moving to real-time. And of course, the fourth one, we're still siloed, right? For many of us, we're still, I would say this is an active area. It has been for a few years, but it's still, in terms of the research that I've done and the companies I've talked to, having siloed teams is still a pretty significant barrier. So everyone has their own flavor of how to transform this and move this into a more holistic, experience. For some retailers that are born digitally, it just might mean, in terms of it might just mean a change of accounting, right? But for some retailers, it's really rethinking how their teams are structured and how they work together and how they sort of manage their business. So there's not one best practice here. I think it really depends on the organization. Okay, so as I get closer to wrapping up, I want to discuss this element of the digital store platform, right? So first I'll roll out this high-level view, and then we'll go a little bit deeper into each one of these. So you can see at the bottom, and this is sort of what we call marketecture, if you will, and these are the technology stacks. And you can see enterprise back-office systems, digital experience platform. On top of that, the store systems sit with your touch points at the top and a contextual delivery wedged between those store systems and touch points, right? And this is coming out of research that we've done over the past year in terms of how both vendors as well as retailers believe their systems are being transformed. So let's go through this. I'll do it quickly, but in a deeper level here for you. So you can see here the enterprise back office systems, things like digital asset management, supply chain, loyalty. These are these systems that have been around for quite some time, and they're not always doing all of the thinking at the retail level, but they're the core platform of retail systems, let's say. On top of that, you add this layer which we call the digital experience platform. There's a lot of implications with this view here. One is that the commerce platform and digital customer experience, call it content and commerce, are coming together. So you heard about that earlier in terms of this mashup of content and commerce. We believe that's occurring now, and you can see some of those partnerships being formed in terms of the vendor community. You have this experience platform that's forming, which is commerce and content. So here we have the digital store systems. Again, hopefully you can see the indication I put in terms of the customer experience side as well as the operational excellence, right? So these are systems like beacons being very focused on customer experience, all the way to labor management and training on the operational side. But notice where we put the InStore Analytics, right? That is the layer that's connecting all of those store systems that can allow those systems to work in real time. Contextual delivery is very important as well. So things like, and you can see here with the icons, it's weather, it's time, it's location. It's all of these, and that's just 3 examples, and often these are coming from third parties as well. But it's adding this layer of context around the customer, right? What are they doing? Where are they located? Who are they, right? And sort of thinking about that before you actually do the delivery. So here are the touch points. Again, focusing on customer on the left and associate on the right, thinking more about that customer experience and operational excellence. right? So this is the stack here, and there's some really important implications here as well. So the first one, again, I mentioned at the digital experience platform level. The implication here is that there's one singular commerce system, right? One commerce system across stores and web. And you see this happening now with some acquisitions and sort of the positioning of vendors in this space in terms of having commerce be across both e-commerce as well as physical stores. We mentioned that contextual delivery piece. Thinking about the store, right? As I mentioned, the InStore Analytics. That's, again, those 10,000 data points, that's all new information, right? Who the customer is with, how is the associate, where are they traveling together, who are they, what's their location within that store. So that contextual delivery is a new layer that's emerging within the retail store platform or the digital store platform. And then finally, those digital store systems, right? I mentioned the InStore Analytics layer going across all of those. But notice I still kept MPOS and POS there. That becomes, it's sort of wedged in between customer experience and operational excellence. If you look at the POS today, it's purely about record keeping, right? But that's moving more towards this engagement area and helping to facilitate engagement in the aisle. The one other thing as I roll this out here is that contextual delivery actually has a strong tie to the digital customer experience piece, right? If you think about companies like Adobe that are creating Adobe Screens, a new product that they have, where they're going into the physical store and you can control those screens through the Adobe Marketing Cloud, they are actually owning the digital experience platform, or I should say they're a part of that ecosystem, and they also have a piece of that contextual delivery. These experience platforms are starting to surround the digital store system. So I would expect in the future that you're going to have these traditional e-commerce systems actually start playing a greater role within a store, and the vendors are starting to move in this direction. So I mentioned that as a way to prepare for that, I believe, eventual occurrence where these platforms are actually driving that store experience. Okay, and I'll just go through this in terms of bullets, and then hopefully if we have some more time, I'm happy to take questions. I know that for half the day we're pretty tight, so we didn't have that opportunity, so maybe we can open that up again. Okay, so perhaps this has been beaten over your head all day. Expose inventory visibility, omni-channel fulfillment, right? Everyone has to do this, in my opinion. This is not a nice to have, this is a must have, right? So really focus on getting that inventory exposed. It enables a lot of things, not only omni-channel fulfillment, but the associate experience as well. How can they be, you saw the data earlier in terms of customers want associates to give them the basics, right? Where is this stuff? How do I buy this? So you need to provide this information to them. Align your teams around the customer. I think we get this piece as well. Drive towards a single view of the customer. So this is an important one as well. As we think about personalization, if we believe that personalization is emerging, you cannot do that unless you understand that customer and that single view of the customer. So start to plan ahead and think about how you're going to do that with your teams. Prepare for real-time data-driven business, both online and in stores. I think online, that's where I grew up running e-commerce. That's been around for quite some time. In the store, not at all, right? It's always in the past. You always have those Monday morning meetings. How were store sales over the weekend? There's no ability for the store to react and make any adjustments in real time. So the physical store will be moving into real time with analytics and some of those digital store systems powering that real time experience. So optimize customer and staff mobile experiences. We think about customer usability on their mobile device quite often. Recently, I did a bunch of research and asked vendors and digital agencies how they tested the experience for associates. None of them actually raised their hand and said, we are actively A/B testing the experience for associates. When you miss the associate experience, they leave the device behind the counter, right? It doesn't just sit there in their hands, they actually abandon it, and so these initiatives fall flat. So you really have to focus on the associate. Leverage location context. So work with your beacon partners to think about how you can use that now right? But also think about how you're going to capture that data for other components of your business, and how will you leverage that location context within your physical stores. It's a massive opportunity. And then finally, build your digital store platform. So retailers that I've spoken with and discussed this concept of the digital store platform said they've been doing it for years, and it starts with exposing inventory visibility. Some of the stuff you don't see, right? You don't see it in the press, but it's happening. And for those organizations that are building those digital store platforms, that by exposing inventory visibility and moving their systems from systems of record to systems of engagement, all of a sudden you're going to see them start stitching this stuff together, and you're going to see some great experiences emerge. So those are my recommendations for you. And I know it's late in the day, so I want to say thank you very much for your time. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them now. So feel free. It could be about anything. World peace. Yes.
You talk about beacons, and right now they're underwhelming. They're fun, but they're not really performing. You didn't talk about Wi-Fi, and when I meet with Cisco and Meraki, they talk about their boxes sort of like beacons, and they are.
Yes.
They really are like beacons. It's just that they don't tie into an app like a beacon, but that may be the advantage.
That's exactly right.
And so do you see a world where iBeacons are cute, but ultimately with the ubiquity of Wi-Fi going into malls and retail, that Wi-Fi could become that new engagement beacon?
Well, so I think it's a portfolio of technologies, right? For those that didn't hear it over here, it's, hey, beacons are cool, but can we use Wi-Fi to do the same thing? And basically, beacons are saying, your phone is listening for a beacon signal and saying, okay, I hear this signal, I hear the strength, so I must be near this area. Wi-Fi basically works in a very similar way, where your phone is looking for that Wi-Fi access point and can begin to triangulate, and they can understand location. So beacons are important because right now they're more accurate. They're more of a local, it's just more accurate in terms of a smaller space, right? They're much easier to deploy. The cost is much lower. We've seen, Facebook now giving beacons away, right? So is Cisco going to give? I'm sorry?
Because Facebook has an install base on apps, but Wi-Fi is being adopted.
It is. So it's a yes and, right? It's not one or the other. If you think about analytics as an example, video has been around for some time in terms of loss prevention, but if you haven't been exploring the analytics space in store, video is actually a great tool in terms of understanding customer behavior, right? So it's really broad. It can assess many different people, but it's not one-to-one. And Wi-Fi maybe sits in the middle, right? You sort of have to opt in and say, yes, I want Wi-Fi, but it can also do anonymous tracking as well, sort of. It's having some challenges now with the MAC address being randomized, but then you get to beacons and it's more one-to-one. So I think you need a portfolio of location technologies, and I think that's the way I see it emerging now. I think it's a yes and, but I do agree that Wi-Fi will be a big part of that location story, of that analytics story. And that's what I mentioned earlier. It's one of those big barriers, is that not everyone has it in every store, in their entire chain, in every location. Okay, so with that, we're out of time, and it's probably dinner time as well. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.